She wore worn-out shoes and a faded uniform, quietly sweeping the same floor where millionaires dined. Her name was Zanil, just a cleaner to most, invisible to many. But behind her tired eyes was a story no one had dared to ask about. Every night, after the last table was cleared and the kitchen lights turned off, Zanil disappeared into the shadows, never complaining, never asking for help. Until one quiet evening, something happened. Her wealthy boss followed her out of curiosity. And what he discovered shattered every assumption he had. Who was this woman living on scraps? Why did she never speak of her struggles? And how could a single act of compassion change everything? Get ready to uncover a tale of heartbreak, survival, and a transformation that will leave you in tears. This is not just the story of a cleaner. It is the journey of a woman who turned pain into power, silence into strength, and poverty into purpose. Now let's begin. At the prestigious Blue Flame Bistro, nestled among the glittering streets of Johannesburg's Sandton district, guests dined beneath chandeliers while jazz music whispered in the background. The rich came in with expensive colognes and heavy laughter, never once glancing at the woman who swept their crumbs off the floor. That woman was Zanil Kumalo. To the world, she was just a waitress, a faded name tag, a stiff apron, tired eyes. But behind that quiet figure was a mother, a widow, and a woman drowning silently beneath life's weight. Each morning, Zanil rose before the sun, cooking pap for her 2 children before they woke. Her alarm clock was not a device. It was the cold air leaking through the holes in the shack's tin roof. The taxi fare she spent to get to work was half her day's wage. Still, she arrived with her uniform pressed and her hair pulled back. No one saw the pain she carried, because she never showed it. The owner of the restaurant, Mr. Thabo Dlamini, was a man of sharp suits and sharper silence. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. Formerly from Soweto, his journey to wealth had hardened him. He watched his staff like a hawk, rarely speaking unless it was business. Most feared him. But what no one knew was that Thabo noticed things, small things, like how Zanil never ate during her breaks, how she stayed behind after every shift, how her uniform seemed older each week. He told himself he didn't care, that he didn't have time to get involved in anyone's sob story. But Zanil's quietness, it stirred something long buried in him, something he didn't want to feel. Late one evening, after the last guests had gone and the kitchen lights had dimmed, Thabo noticed Zanil standing near the trash bins at the back of the restaurant. Her body was slightly hunched, as if she were hiding something. He waited, watching. She took out a plastic bag from her apron and quietly packed some untouched leftover rice, chicken bones, and vegetables, food that would have been tossed away. She wasn't stealing. She was gathering. Thabo stepped closer, and for the first time, Zanil looked startled. I was just for my kids, she murmured. There was no begging in her voice. No shame. Just honesty. Thabo nodded. You should go, he said coldly. But inside something cracked. That night, Thabo didn't sleep well. He lay in his king-sized bed, thinking about her eyes, how they held strength and suffering all at once. He thought about his own mother, how she used to skip meals to feed him, working 2 jobs after his father left. He hadn't visited her grave in years, hadn't allowed himself to feel. Was this waitress reminding him of what he once was? The next day he didn't speak to Zanil. He watched her work like always. Efficient, quiet, invisible. But now he was paying attention. Zanil's day didn't end at the restaurant. After her shift, she walked nearly 1 kilometer from the taxi drop-off to her shack in Alexandra. That evening, her youngest son, Lwazi, was burning up with fever. She held him close, whispering prayers. She had no money for a clinic, no one to call, just a cloth soaked in cool water, pressed against his head, and a song her mother once sang during storms. Her daughter, Nomvula, clung to her. Mama, is Lwazi going to die? Zanil didn't answer. She just kept singing, even as tears fell onto her son's damp forehead. Tomorrow she would still go to work. 'Cause she had no choice. The morning after Loisy's fever spiked, Zanil didn't stay home. Not because she didn't care, but because staying home meant no income. And no income meant no food, no medicine, and no taxi fare for the next day. She left early, after wrapping Loisy in 2 blankets and asking her neighbor, old Mama Bika, to check on him during the day. As she stood in the taxi, squeezed between tired workers and school children, her eyes blinked rapidly to fight back tears. Her heart was in that shack. But her hands were tied. At the Blue Flame Bistro, the lights sparkled, the tables were spotless, and the smell of sizzling garlic filled the air. Zanil moved like a ghost, efficient but distant. Her co-workers laughed during prep, but she remained silent. No one asked if she was okay. They assumed she was just tired as usual. Only Mr. Dlamini noticed how she nearly spilled a tray of wine glasses. Her hands shook slightly as she caught herself. "She's slipping," one of the supervisors whispered. "She needs a break," another muttered. But Tabo said nothing. Not yet. That evening, the restaurant buzzed with wealthy patrons. Among them was Ms. Lindow, a socialite known for treating service staff like furniture. She waved her hand impatiently when Zanil arrived with the starter. "You're late," Lindow snapped. "Do you think I have time to wait for peasants?" Zanil bowed her head slightly. "I apologize, ma'am. The chef was confirming your special request." "You dare speak back to me?" Lindow hissed, standing. She picked up her half-full glass and threw the wine in Zanil's face. The entire restaurant paused. Zanil gasped softly but didn't move. The red liquid dripped from her face and apron. Her hand trembled at her side. No tears. No anger. Just quiet. Mr. Dlamini watched from the bar. "Clean yourself up," the floor manager whispered harshly to her, trying to avoid further drama. But Tabo clenched his fist. He didn't speak, but something inside him began to boil. Zanil left the restaurant that night soaked in humiliation and cheap Cabernet Sauvignon. She didn't take a taxi to walk. She walked because she needed time. She walked because the air, even cold, felt less cruel than people. Every footstep echoed with doubt. Was she failing her children? Was this life ever going to change? Did her dignity even matter anymore? She reached home just before midnight. Inside, Loisy was wheezing. His fever had worsened. Nomvula was curled beside him, fanning his face with her schoolbook. Zanil knelt, panicked, holding him close. "Mama," he whispered weakly. "It's cold." She lit a candle and wrapped him tighter, whispering again the song from her childhood. But this time her voice cracked. The next morning she barely made it to work. At 10 a.m., while carrying 2 plates of breakfast for a couple on the balcony, Zanil stumbled. Her knees buckled. The plates fell and shattered. Her body collapsed onto the floor in front of everyone. Gasps echoed. "Is she drunk?" Someone whispered. "No, look at her, she's burning up." Tabo Dlamini was at her side before anyone else. He knelt, placed his hand on her forehead. It was burning. "Get her some water," he ordered. "Now!" Zanil opened her eyes faintly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't eat. I was just tired." He looked into her face. Pale, sunken, exhausted. It hit him. She wasn't lazy. She was collapsing under a weight no one else could see. Mr. Dlamini had her taken to the back room to rest. He cancelled his meetings for the day. He drove himself to Alexandra, to her address listed in the employee file. The neighborhood was worse than he imagined. Shacks stitched together with hope and tin sheets. He knocked. An elderly neighbor led him in. What he saw shook him. 2 children alone. A boy too weak to lift his head. A girl trying to warm water using a single candle. No food. No medicine. Just silence. That evening, Tabo sat in his car for an hour outside her shack, unable to drive off. He had built empires. Yet here was a woman who built a life from nothing, with no help, no shortcuts. Just love. And now she was breaking. But something in him whispered, "Not on my watch." Zanil slowly opened her eyes to the scent of antiseptic and the soft hum of air conditioning. The light was gentle, unlike the harsh bulb in her shack. Her body ached, but for the first time in years, she lay on a real mattress with white linen sheets. A nurse adjusted her for. "You're in a private clinic in Rosebank. You collapsed from exhaustion and low blood sugar," she said gently. Zanil tried to sit up, panic swelling in her chest. "My children, Loisy. They're safe. Don't worry. Your boss is handling everything." Zanil froze. "My boss?" She didn't know what shocked her more, being in a private hospital or the thought of Mr. Dlamini caring. Then the door opened. Tabo Dlamini stepped in, holding a thermos and a paper bag. "You like a mahu?" he asked softly. "My mother swore by it when I was sick." Zanil blinked, stunned. She'd never heard his voice this calm, this human. Tabo sat beside her bed and poured the fermented maize drink into a cup. He handed it to her and waited until she took a sip. "You've been working yourself to death," he said. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Zanil looked away. "People like me don't get helped. We endure. We serve. We disappear." Her words pierced him deeper than he expected. "I saw your children," he said after a pause. "You're raising them alone, and doing a better job than most who have the world handed to them." Zanil's eyes welled up. No one had ever seen her. Not really. Not as a woman. A mother. A warrior. Just a cleaner. Till now. Tabo reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "I've paid for your hospital bills. And your children are temporarily staying in a guest house near my place. They've been fed. Loisy has seen a doctor." Zanil gasped. Why would you do that?" Tabo looked down. "Because once upon a time, someone did it for my mother, and I forgot how much it mattered." 3 days later, Zanil was discharged. Tabo personally drove her home. Not to the shack, but to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a gated community in Randburg. She stared in disbelief as the gate opened and her children ran out, healthier and glowing. "Mama!" Nomvula cried, wrapping her arms around her. Loisy followed, his color returned, holding a small toy car. Zanil turned to Tabo, speechless. "I paid the first year's rent," he said. "You can focus on your kids now. Get them steady. We'll talk about work later." Zanil broke down in tears, not from sorrow but from release. After all she had held in for so long, the kindness shattered her defenses. Over the next few days, Zanil rested. For the first time in years, she didn't wake to leaking roofs or the fear of job loss. She walked her children to school and cooked proper meals with fresh vegetables and meat. Meanwhile, Tabo found himself restless. At the restaurant, he noticed things he'd ignored before. The tired look in the eyes of his dishwashers, the holes in the shoes of the night cleaner, the silence of the women who worked double shifts. Zanil had opened his eyes. And with that awakening came guilt and purpose. He called his HR manager. "I want a full audit of our lowest paid staff. Housing, family status, health coverage. I want names, faces, stories." Change was coming. One evening, Tabo visited Zanil's new apartment again. The children were doing homework, and the smell of chocolate filled the air. He sat at her table as she poured him a drink. There was no awkwardness now, only a quiet gratitude between them. "I want to offer you a new position," he said. "You'll assist my operations team. Better hours, better pay, more flexibility for your children." Zanil's eyes widened. "Me? But I didn't go far in school." "You don't need a degree to have strength, leadership, and resilience. You've already shown me more of that than most people with a suit and tie." Her hands trembled as she accepted. In that moment, both of them realized. This wasn't just a second chance for Zanil. It was a second chance for Tabo too, to become the kind of man his mother would have been proud of. Zanil stood in front of the glass doors of Blue Flame Bistro, not as a cleaner, but as the newly appointed operations assistant. Her clothes were crisp, her shoes new, her heart racing. As she stepped in, heads turned. Whispers floated in the air. Is that Zanil? The cleaner? Why is she wearing office clothes? But she walked straight to the office floor, her back straight, her head held high. Her ID badge gleamed with the new title. Her workstation was modest but clean, and her responsibilities clear. She wasn't just in the building to mop anymore, she was helping run it. Tubbo walked by, nodding. You belong here. Those words echoed louder than applause. While Zanil adjusted to her new role, not everyone celebrated her rise. Naledi, the assistant manager who once ignored Zanil's greetings, now saw her as a threat. Naledi had expected a promotion herself, and seeing someone from the slums jump ahead of her stung. She's not qualified, Naledi muttered during break. She'll crash soon enough. She wasn't alone. A few others gave Zanil cold stares, talked behind her back, or intentionally left her out of group emails. But Zanil didn't fight back. She did what she always did, worked harder, learned faster, stayed quiet. What they didn't know was that hardship had trained her for challenges. Office politics couldn't break someone who had survived empty stomachs and fevered children. Zanil now had better hours, but responsibility also increased. She'd leave early to drop the kids at school, then head to work. At lunch, she studied financial reports and safety protocols. In the evening, she'd cook, help with homework, and plan her next workday. One night, Nomvula sat beside her and whispered, "Mama, you don't look tired anymore." Zanil smiled. "That's because my heart is full, my baby." She began attending school meetings, opening a savings account, and even joined a weekend course on business administration. But she never forgot to say thank you, to God, to her children, and silently to Tabo Dlamini. Meanwhile, Tabo's quiet transformation deepened. He'd begun mentoring young entrepreneurs from underprivileged communities, visiting orphanages on weekends, and restructuring staff policies at his restaurant. Staff now got paid leave, better health coverage, and support for emergencies. One evening, he sat in his penthouse apartment, sipping rooibos tea. His mother's old Bible lay beside him. He flipped through it and paused at a verse she had underlined. "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done." Proverbs 19 verse 17. Tabo closed the Bible and whispered, "Thank you, Ma. I finally understand." Just as Zanil was settling into her new life, trouble knocked again, but not at the office. This time, it was her estranged ex-husband Bekazitha, who had abandoned the family 2 years prior. He showed up one evening reeking of alcohol, outside her apartment gate. "I heard you're living large now," he sneered. "New job, new place. What about me, Zanil?" She stood tall. "You lost your place in this family the day you walked away." Bekazitha spat on the ground. "Don't forget, those are my kids. You think I won't come for them if I want to?" Zanil's voice trembled, but she didn't step back. "Try me, and you'll meet the law." The gate guard intervened and forced him away, but the moment left Zanil shaken. She called Tabo that night. "I may need legal help," she said quietly. "You have it," he replied without hesitation. "Whatever you need." But deep down Zanil knew. This was only the beginning of a new storm. And this time she would not face it alone. Zanil couldn't sleep. That night after Bekazitha showed up, she sat by her bedroom window, hugging her knees as she watched the moon hang low over the quiet street. The image of his bloodshot eyes and the slur in his voice kept replaying in her mind. She hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, since the night he stormed out, angry that she couldn't give him a better life. He left her with 2 hungry mouths and a trail of debt. But now that her life was finally getting better, he came crawling back. Not to apologize, not to rebuild, but to feed on her progress. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tabo read, "I've contacted a legal team. You'll meet them on Monday. And I'm assigning you private security for the apartment." She sighed with relief. But deep inside, the emotional scars Bekazitha left had reopened. 2 days later at the restaurant, Zanil was briefing the kitchen staff about a new inventory system when her phone vibrated again. "Ma'am," the school receptionist said over the line, "there's a man here claiming to be Lwazi and Nomvula's father. He's trying to take them out of school." Zanil's blood ran cold. "Do not let him take them. I'm on my way." She rushed to the school, her heart pounding. When she arrived, she saw Bekazitha outside, arguing with a security guard. Her children stood behind the gate, wide-eyed and terrified. "Zanil," he shouted, "you can't keep my kids from me." She moved straight to the guard and said, "Call the police. Now." The police arrived within 15 minutes, and thanks to her earlier conversation with Tabo's legal contact, Zanil had the documentation to prove sole custody. As Bekazitha was led away, screaming threats, Zanil knelt beside her kids. "He's not going to take you. Not now. Not ever." That night, after calming the children, Zanil sat down with Tabo at his office. Her eyes were red, but her posture was firm. "I thought I buried that part of my life," she said softly. "But it's clawing its way back." Tabo leaned forward. "Zanil, you've built too much to let a broken man tear it down. You've fought alone long enough. You're not alone anymore." They developed a formal legal strategy, including restraining orders and custody filings. Tabo even introduced her to a counselor. "I've seen how trauma eats people from the inside," he said. "You don't have to carry this alone." Zanil nodded. She didn't trust easily, but something in Tabo's eyes made her believe him. At school, Nomvula's grades were slipping. Her teachers noticed she'd become quiet and withdrawn. Zanil sat her down at home and asked, "Talk to me, baby." "I'm scared he'll come back and take Lwazi," Nomvula whispered. "Like he used to shout and hit things." Zanil wrapped her arms around her daughter. "He won't. Promise you. We are protected now." They started a nightly ritual, reading together, telling stories from Zanil's childhood, and sometimes even dancing to Miriam Makeba songs. Slowly, laughter returned to the apartment. And at school, Nomvula smiled again. Zanil realized. Healing wasn't instant, but it was possible. Few weeks passed. Bekazitha's court hearing came and went. He didn't show up. The restraining order was granted. Zanil was legally shielded. On a rainy Friday evening, Tabo invited her and the kids to a dinner he was hosting for all restaurant staff and their families. Zanil was hesitant but eventually agreed. The event was held in the outdoor courtyard of the Blue Flame Bistro, decorated with fairy lights and music humming in the background. The staff cheered as Tabo stood to speak. "Tonight I want to honor someone," he said, holding up a glass. "A woman who reminded me of the power of dignity, hard work, and quiet strength." Everyone turned to Zanil. Her heart skipped. She rose from the lowest point to become the backbone of this business. "Please, join me in celebrating Ms. Zanil Kumalo." Applause erupted. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of pain but of pride. And in that moment, under the lights, surrounded by her children and the people who had become her second family, Zanil realized. She was finally free. The applause from that night at the bistro stayed with Zanil long after the event. But it wasn't the recognition that moved her. It was the idea that maybe, just maybe, she had more to give than she thought. One Sunday afternoon, as the kids napped, she stared at the notebook where she jotted down her dreams. On the first page, in large bold letters, she wrote, "Project Laisa, Feeding Hope." Zanil had a vision, to launch a weekend meal program for hungry children in the inner city. She knew what hunger looked like. She'd lived it. Now, with stability, resources, and support, she wanted to give back. She pitched the idea to Tabo during their weekly staff check-in. "Let's do it," he said without hesitation. "I'll sponsor the first 6 months. And I'll get some of my friends in business involved too." For the first time in her life, Zanil wasn't just surviving, she was building. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Zanil partnered with a few teachers, social workers, and community elders to identify children most in need. She worked after hours coordinating food donations, planning schedules, and finding a venue, a run-down community hall on the edge of Soweto. The kids would receive hot meals, basic hygiene kits, and even tutoring support. On launch day, Zanil arrived early, dressed in a t-shirt with the Project Laisa logo. Volunteers showed up. So did a news crew Tabo had tipped off. He wanted the world to see what Zanil was doing. Over 100 children came that day. As she watched them eat, laugh and play, a tear rolled down her cheek. She wasn't the cleaner in the shadows anymore. She was a light in someone else's darkness. Zanil's story began spreading like wildfire. Local newspapers called her the Phoenix of Soweto. NGOs reached out. A small grant followed. Then another. Within 2 months, Project Laisa was feeding over 300 children across 3 locations. Zanil trained new volunteers, helped jobless parents get involved, and even taught young girls about personal hygiene and self-worth. She started receiving speaking invites. One day, she was invited to speak at a women's empowerment seminar in Pretoria. On stage, with a mic in her hand and a full house before her, she shared her truth. The struggle, the pain, the poverty, the loneliness, and how compassion changed everything. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Her voice, once barely heard even by her own family, had become a source of healing for others. Back at home, Zanil sat with Lwazi and Nomvula one night after dinner. They were doing homework, laughing and teasing each other. Nomvula suddenly looked up and asked, "Mama, are you happy now?" Zanil smiled. "I am. But more importantly, I'm free." She thought back to the girl who used to clean toilets with a broken heart and empty stomach. That girl still lived inside her, but now she walked beside a woman who found her strength, voice, and purpose. The trauma hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. Every child fed by Project Laisa reminded her that her pain wasn't wasted. It had become someone else's miracle. One evening, Tabo invited Zanil and her kids to a quiet dinner at his private residence. The house was elegant but warm, filled with African art and childhood photos of him and his late mother. Over dinner he said, "You know, Zanil, I don't think my mother would believe what I've become. But I think she'd love what you're doing." Zanil looked at him. "Your kindness lit the first flame. I just kept it burning." The children played in the garden while Tabo and Zanil sat under the stars. There was silence between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken respect, shared pain, and quiet admiration. For the first time in years, Zanil didn't feel afraid of the future. She felt open to it. And in that moment, beneath the moonlight, a bond stronger than friendship quietly formed, one rooted in empathy, built through fire, and nourished by purpose. It was barely 6 a.m. when Zanil heard a knock on her apartment door. She wiped the sleep from her eyes, wrapped a robe around her body, and cautiously opened it. 2 unfamiliar men in suits stood before her, both holding ID cards. "Miss Zanil Kumalo?" the taller one asked. She nodded slowly. "We're with Mzansi Financial Security Bureau. We're here regarding suspicious activity involving your identity and past financial records." Zanil's heart sank. "What are you talking about?" They explained that someone had been using her old identity to open accounts, apply for credit, and even sign for informal property sales in her name. The most terrifying part. The trail traced back to Bekazitha, her ex. And now, because some of those fake loans were unpaid, her name was being dragged into court, again. At the Blue Flame Bistro later that morning, Zanil sat across from Tabo in the staff lounge, visibly shaken. "I've worked so hard, Tabo. I've built a new life, a clean one. And now this." He leaned in gently. "Zanil, we'll get to the bottom of this. You've got me. You've got lawyers. You're not alone anymore." But even he looked concerned. Later that day he made several calls, first to a private investigator, then to his friend in the Financial Crimes Division. The deeper they looked, the more complicated it became. Fraud, forgery, a fake signature on a property title, even an illegal business license opened under her name in a rural province she'd never visited. This wasn't just personal. It was criminal. 3 days later, Just as Zanil was finalizing a delivery at one of the Project Laisa kitchens, a reporter showed up unannounced. "Miss Kumalo, care to comment on the fraud investigation tied to your name?" Cameras were rolling. Neighbors were watching. She froze. "No comment," she whispered and walked away, heart racing. By evening, the headline was on multiple news sites. "Local hero accused of fraud. Project Laisa founder under scrutiny." Zanil's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Sponsors were pulling out. Parents hesitated to send their kids. The board of one of the partner NGOs sent an official query. Everything she had built was unraveling. Tears fell freely that night. "I don't deserve this," she cried into her pillow. Nomvula crept in and wrapped her arms around her mother. "We know the truth, Mama. That's what matters." Tabo didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, he released a public statement. "I stand by Zanil Kumalo, whose integrity I've witnessed firsthand. These claims are the result of identity theft, not misconduct. Investigations are underway, and we will clear her name." He also reached out to a media house that owed him a favor. They aired a special piece titled, "The Real Zanil Kumalo, From Cleaner to Community Hero." In it, testimonies from restaurant staff, school teachers, parents, and even children poured in. They spoke of her tireless work, her humble beginnings, her impact. Public sentiment began to shift. The hashtag We Stand With Zanil trended on social media. Donations trickled back in. Old sponsors reconsidered. A week later, the private investigator delivered a bombshell report. "Your ex-partner Bekazitha used a stolen copy of your expired ID to set up every fraudulent activity. We traced his movements, bank transactions, and even phone records. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was handed over to the authorities, and an arrest warrant was issued. He was picked up while trying to cross into Lesotho. But the final twist. He had told people in the province that Zanil was his wife, and she had sent him to buy land for her NGO. He'd collected thousands in donations meant for orphans. The damage was deep, but the truth was deeper. And now, justice had begun to speak. The court hearing was brief but powerful. Zanil sat beside her lawyer, her palms sweaty but her spirit calm. The evidence against Bekazitha was damning. Video footage, documents with forged signatures, testimonies from those he deceived. The judge's voice echoed across the courtroom. "The accused is found guilty of identity theft, fraud, and impersonation. Miss Kumalo is hereby cleared of all charges. Her name is restored." Tears ran down Zanil's cheeks, not from pain but from relief. Outside, journalists gathered around, but this time they weren't chasing scandal. They were celebrating redemption. Microphones were held out, but Zanil simply said, "I didn't fight alone. I had truth, I had faith. And I had people who believed in me." The crowd applauded. She wasn't just vindicated. She was reborn. That night, Tabo invited Zanil and her kids to a small victory dinner at the bistro, now transformed into a vibrant evening spot for families. After the meal, as soft jazz played in the background and Nomvula danced with the servers, Tabo gently took Zanil's hand. "I need to tell you something," he said. Zanil looked at him, curious. "I haven't just admired your strength. I care deeply for you. You've changed how I see the world. And more than that, how I see myself." Zanil didn't speak immediately. She smiled, a quiet warmth glowing in her chest. "I care for you too," she replied softly. "But this time I want to do things right. No rushing. No hiding. Just honesty." He nodded. "One step at a time." It wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, grounded, healing, and hopeful. Months passed, and Project Laisa grew in ways Zanil never imagined. With her name cleared, donors returned stronger than ever. Government officials offered land for permanent kitchens. NGOs volunteered logistics. A tech company donated learning tablets. Zanil hired more staff, many of them single mothers who, like her, had been forgotten by society. She launched a second initiative, Laisa Homes, offering shelter and job training to homeless women with children. One day, at the opening ceremony of the third kitchen, a teenage girl approached her shyly. "Miss Zanil," she whispered, "you spoke at my school last year. I was thinking of ending my life. But your story, it saved me." Zanil hugged her tightly, overwhelmed. This was more than food. More than buildings. This was legacy. One quiet Saturday, Zanil drove to the township where it all began, the room where she once starved, cried, and begged for leftovers. The old structure was still there. Faded. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then, she reached into her handbag and placed a note under the door. "To the woman I once was. I'm proud of you. You survived. You kept going. And you became more than the world thought you could ever be." She walked away, not in shame, but in triumph. She wasn't that woman anymore. But she would always remember her, because she was the root of her strength. On a crisp Sunday morning, Zanil sat on her balcony with a cup of rooibos tea, watching the sun rise over Johannesburg. Nomvula and Loisy were still asleep. The house was quiet. She thought about her journey, from cleaner to community leader, from silence to speech, from betrayal to love. The pain hadn't been erased, but it had been transformed, into purpose, into power, into peace. As birds sang in the distance and warmth filled the sky, she whispered to herself, "This is my sunrise." And it truly was, the beginning of a life she built, one kind act at a time.